So, the end of class last time, we talked about the ocean model, the five-factor model of personality, which included openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism or emotional instability. And we talked about some extremes of people on those traits, as well as contrasting trait theory to humanistic personality theory and Freudian psychodynamic theory. We ended by having you rate my personality on the trait of extroversion, and we get a range of scores, but they generally are pretty high. So I asked you why your ratings might be inaccurate, and we talked about how sometimes your behavior in a situation is determined not just by the personality that you have, but by the characteristics of the situation, what's expected of you, right? My job expects me to be outgoing and energetic, more so than other jobs. So what you see in a classroom might be both a product of my behavior in a classroom because of my personality, and it could also be a product of the situation that I find myself in. We call that the person situation debate. This was started by Walter Miel in the 1950s, who argued that when you look at the correlations, you may remember correlations from earlier in the course. A correlation measures the relationship between two variables. So in this case, what's the correlation between your personality and the behavior you actually show in particular situations? So if it's really strong and your personality strongly predicts your behavior in situations, that would suggest that personality really is a major driving factor in your behavior. The alternative, though, is that the situation matters more. And you may remember that just last week we talked about multiple examples: the Milgram study, their behavior in relationships, group behavior based on conformity. We gave you lots of examples where your behavior is really strongly also caused by the situations you find yourself in. That's the situation side of this person situation debate. Walter Miel in the 1950s found when you looked at the correlation between behavior and personality, then in fact there was not a strong correlation, that they were pretty weak, that a lot of people's behavior was only slightly related to their personality and probably more strongly related to the situations they find themselves in. And that makes sense, right? Because you may be an amazing student. You come to class every day with your computer and your notepad. You're highly organized because you want to do well in school. And the situation, right? You want to put a good face forward to other students and to yourself. You want to show your parents that you're working really hard in school. But in fact, you get into your car and you drive to your house, and in fact, it's a pigsty. So, which of those situations is a better honest indicator of your actual personality, right? Which of those behaviors is more indicative? And really, right, it may just be that there's characteristics about your car and your room that are just not very important to you. That it's okay if it's a little messy and you kind of deal with it. But there may be some demand characteristics of the situation when you go to school or work. I guarantee you that your behavior at work is probably better than your behavior at home because you're worried about punishment or losing your job at work, whereas at home, you feel like you don't have some of those demand characteristics. This argument that your personality was not strongly related to your behavior produced a major blow to research on personality up until the 1980s. It was in the 1980s that studies started to show that, in fact, your behavior may be both a combination of your personality and the situation you find yourself in. Let me give you an example. We're going to take an example from a study published in 1986 where they asked participants to rate how stressful these events would be on a 1 to 5 scale, with 5 being the worst. Forgetting your pencil at home, so having to borrow one from someone at school, dropping your food on the ground just as you're walking into class, a blind date that your friend set you up with that you're a little nervous about, a fight with your really good friend who you never fight with, an unexpected F on an exam, or another speeding ticket. So, I want you to think about how you would rate those on a 1 to 5 scale. Take a minute here, pause the video. Okay, so my guess is that if you actually took the time to do these ratings, and I'm assuming you did, that you probably rated some of these events as being less stressful and less traumatic. My guess is that forgetting a pencil or dropping your food on the ground is not as bad as getting an unexpected F on an exam or getting a fight with a friend, because those are things that tend to be worse for us. So that argues, and in fact, this study found the same thing, that things towards the bottom of the screen tended to be rated as being more stressful, things towards the top of the screen were rated as being less stressful. Interestingly enough, though, this study also divided up their participants into those that rated low on the trait of neuroticism, so these were the pretty relaxed, low-stress people, and those that were high on the trait of neuroticism, so these are the more stressed out, more worrisome participants. And what they also noticed, as you can guess, is that participants that were low in neuroticism, they didn't care. They tended to rate all of these events as being slightly less stressful, even though an F on an exam or a speeding ticket might be a 3 to them. Forgetting a pencil or dropping food on the ground was a 1. Participants that are high in neuroticism, though, tended to rate all of these events as being more stressful. So forgetting a pencil might be a 3, dropping a food on the ground might be a 3, and then the other ones might be 4s and 5s. So this, in addition to other studies, told us that in fact your behavior in a situation is the product of both your personality as well as your situation. You go to work every day and you are on. You are awake and alert and you are friendly to customers, even when in fact you don't necessarily want to be friendly to them and it's not really something that you're inclined to do when outside of the work situation. But you may also find that your coworker who's right next to you, who is always on even when they're not at work, right? They're just a little bit higher level than you. They're always energetic. They're always ready to go. Sometimes it's annoying, but in fact, right, that's showing that in fact their personality produces their behavior in addition to the situation that you find yourself in. Now, let's talk about what shapes your personality. Um, so there are 3 factors that give us evidence, 3 studies that show us that in fact your personality is shaped by a variety of factors. One is first the society and the culture that you grow up in. And I'll use an example from a single study showing that in fact if you compare the personality traits of students, university students in Hong Kong and university students in the United States, you find is that Hong Kong students tend to be lower in extroversion than American students. And that makes sense. In East Asian cultures, you're not supposed to be outgoing, highly energetic. You're not supposed to stand out, right? In collectivistic cultures like Hong Kong, you're not supposed to be that person that stands out in a crowd. So it's not surprising that they would be lower in extroversion. In America, though, the expectation is, right, because we're individualistic, you're supposed to stand out. You're supposed to be energetic and somewhat obnoxious, right? It fits into the stereotype of the obnoxious American tourist. And in fact, while the stereotype may not be true, American students generally are higher in extroversion. In addition, Hong Kong students, even though they're lower in extroversion, are higher in conscientiousness. Again, it makes sense. In those collectivistic cultures where you're supposed to be dependent, you're supposed to be dependable, your parents can rely on you, you would expect that in fact they would be more conscientious and more organized. Whereas American students who are supposed to be more individualistic, they're supposed to be independent, they're supposed to do things on their own. So in fact you see that they have lower conscientiousness. But your personality is not just shaped by your society and cultural background, but also by the immediate social experiences that shape you. For example, your family. So in fact, your family does shape how you grow up and the kind of personality traits that you develop. I'm going to use the example of birth order. So I'm sure that some of you are only children or first children, you're the oldest. Some of you are the last children or the youngest. And yeah, I know, some of you are middle children, but nobody cares anyway, so let's move on. Okay, so let's talk about birth order. There have been a lot of studies looking at the relationship between personality and birth order. The only things that consistently pop out in across all these studies is that firstborn children tend to be lower in openness to experience. Lastborn children tend to be higher in openness to experience. And that makes sense. Firstborn children are often expected to be the holders of family traditions. They're expected to hold on to family rules and rituals, so they would be more conservative, right, which is lower in openness to experience. Now, again, that is not politically conservative. That just means they like tradition. They like things the way they are. They like predictability in their patterns. Newborn children or youngest children they're more open to experience, right? They're the ones who experiment. They're the ones, they don't have to hold family traditions. They don't have to do what's expected of them. They can go their own way more typically. In addition to culture, society, and family, Your personality is also shaped by the nervous system that you have developed early in life, by your biological underpinnings. An example of this is related to extroversion. So remember, introverts are people with low extroversion scores. When you do a variety of measurements of nervous system stimulation on introverts, what you find is that whether it's loud noises or powerful flavors, introverts tend to not like those. They tend to not like the taste of raw lemons or raw limes. They tend to not like really spicy foods. And they tend to get easily overstimulated by loud noises or crowds. Whereas extroverts, on the other hand, are the opposite. They actually need that additional stimulation. So they tend to prefer spicier foods. They like the taste of raw citrus fruit, and they like crowds and loud noises. They're more likely to go to concerts, for example. Now, again, these do not determine your behavior. These push your behavior in a particular direction. So, of course, some of you are introverts who do like spicy foods, and some of you are extroverts who don't like spicy foods. But in general, there is a correlation there between your extroversion score and your sensitivity of your nervous system to stimulation. So, in fact, then introverts avoid stimulated environments, those with loud noises, powerful smells, or lots of activity, to avoid their nervous system being overstimulated. You may find that if you're an introvert, that spending a lot of time being social with a group of friends and going to parties is exhausting. And you actually, afterwards, all you want to do is go home and have time to recuperate, right? That is this idea that your nervous system is easily overstimulated. Okay, last, let's talk about how personality shapes your behavior. And I gave you a couple of examples last time, but let me give you a few more. There are lots of correlations between personality and behavior. For example, people that are low in conscientiousness, these are adolescents and young adults, tend to be more likely to engage in binge drinking. That is, drinking more than 4 drinks in a 2-hour sitting. They tend to be more likely to experiment with marijuana and cigarettes. Now, this doesn't mean become habitual or addicted to it. This just means they experiment, they try it out. People that are high in neuroticism, because of their high anxiety, they tend to overuse alcohol. So they show greater general use of alcohol. Their friends with low neuroticism scores or medium neuroticism scores may have 1 drink. They, on the other hand, may have 2. I mentioned this example last time. People that are high in neuroticism and high in conscientiousness actually get better grades, right? Because they're both nervous and also highly organized. So it means when they start to worry about a test, they start studying because they're highly organized. That contrasts with people that are high in neuroticism but low in conscientiousness. They're worried about grades, but they're not organized enough to know what to do, so they tend to get panic attacks. Instead, they get worse grades. Another example is that in relationships, people are more satisfied in their relationship if their partner is low in neuroticism. This should remind you of attachment styles, right? People that have low neuroticism scores tend to be more securely attached. So they're not as worried that their partner is going to leave them. And because of that, because they have less anxiety, their anxiety doesn't come out on their partner. People with high neuroticism scores, though, they're worried about their partner leaving them or other things happening in their relationship, and that comes out in their behavior, and it often harms the satisfaction. It doesn't mean their relationship is necessarily going to end. It just means they generally have slightly lower satisfaction scores. In addition, people that are higher in openness to experience tend to be more likely to engage in artistic careers, or if they don't have an artistic career, they actually bring artistry into the career that they have. Third, people that are high in neuroticism tend to always think the grass is greener. They're generally dissatisfied with their jobs. They always think, there's got to be something better out there, which means they're also more likely to switch jobs. And of course, that cycle will continue for them. Fourth, people that are high in conscientiousness tend to be more diligent on tasks. They're more organized, they work on them ahead of time, they get them done prior to when they're due. So they also tend to do better in the workplace because they get raises more frequently, their work is more appreciated because their work tends to be more pulled together and more organized. Again, as I mentioned, just because you don't have high conscientiousness now, it will go up across your lifetime, not to worry. But it does take a little bit of organization on your part to get that started. Okay, that's the end of this lecture. Email me with any questions, and I'll see you on Monday in the library. Bye.